Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another video. We got the next edition of the mock draft. Hope y'all all doing well. Uh, I've been slacking lately, not as many videos as I should be putting out. However, uh, I'm putting this one out, so fuck it. Let's get right into it though. At number one, we got the Chicago Bears, and as we get closer to the season effectively wrapping up, and closer to the actual draft, I'm going to be going a lot more in depth on a lot of these teams and what I really think, more focusing more on what I think is actually going to happen rather than what I would do personally if I was in charge. So for the Bears, you see the team needs there. Obviously, you need more weapons for Justin Fields. I would like some better interior offensive linemen. Then defensively, they kind of rallied at the end of last season. They really stepped it up the second half of last season defensively. But obviously, I think you still need a number one pass rusher. Maybe not number one, but somebody on the other side of Montez Sweat. And then if you don't bring back Jalen Johnson, certainly DB would be on this list. For the Bears, look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think Justin Fields is more than good enough to be a franchise quarterback. Hell, if you compare him to a bunch of the other young quarterbacks drafted recently, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, like a bunch of guys who just failed, really. And even comparing to a guy like Trevor Lawrence, honest, this may sound crazy, but as of right now, I kind of have more confidence in Justin Fields than even a Trevor Lawrence right now because I've seen Fields kind of do more with less recently. Trevor Lawrence has been on the down or the decline for at least a year now, so I feel like Fields for sure is good enough to be a number one quarterback, but that's not really all that's going into it here. Somebody I saw a video where somebody was talking about if you were to replace Fields in the draft this year, right? Rather than having to pay Fields because he's due for a contract extension soon, rather than having to pay Fields 30 plus, probably even closer to $40 million a season, you could basically reset, draft a new quarterback, and have 5 years on his contract before you would inevitably have to pay him. And I understand that, and that makes sense to me. However, I think the better option would be to trade this pick like he did last season and get at least, but not limited to, three first round picks. So I just think the value is much better with that proposition. However, I do think it's increasingly likely that the Bears do end up drafting a quarterback. And with that being said, let's get into it. I got them taking Caleb Williams. I'm very confident that Caleb is going to be the number one pick, regardless of who has the pick. If somebody else trades up, or if the Bears just keep the pick, Caleb is a generational prospect. For some reason, around the end of last season, people kind of, I guess they were waiting. Right, there were a lot of people waiting in the wings for Caleb to kind of falter a little bit so they could start piling on him. I didn't really see it. I saw the talent around him was not that good. He played some bad games. I mean, let's not get this mistaken. Against Notre Dame, for example, he played the worst game of his career, but I still don't think that affects what is USC failing at the end of the season have to do with Caleb's skill set at the NFL level. It really has nothing to do with it. I think he is a 10 out of 10 number one prospect. Would draft him with the number one pick any day of the week, not think twice about it. Um, he has all the skills you need: accuracy, using his legs, escaping the pocket, buying time, making throws downfield, the explosive plays, the miracle plays. The only thing I would say that could possibly hurt Caleb is his frequency to try and make the big play, try and make the hero play, when sometimes, or a lot of times, you don't need to. It's better to just live to play another down, take an incomplete pass, take a dump off pass. He tries to go all in a lot of times and it gets him into trouble. That's the only thing I could say negatively about Caleb. I think if he goes to the Bears, I think he'd be a great quarterback there. Next up, we have the Commanders. The Commanders are possibly in the worst position out of any team in the entire NFL, really. I mean, the, the Ron Rivera experiment failed. Sam Howell, I think, has lost any rapport he had. I don't think he's the option moving forward. Um, I thought the strength of this team was their young, up and coming defensive line, but they traded their best two young edge rushers. I don't know why on God's green earth you trade both Chase Young and Montez Sweat, because we now see they're both good elsewhere. So I don't understand what the Commanders are doing. They didn't get a first round pick back for either of those guys. It's man, it's rough. The Commanders have just failed time and time again in the draft. And here we are. What do they need? Well, they need fucking everything. You need everything here if you're the Commanders. There's nothing that's off the table here. Probably wouldn't look to take an interior offensive lineman or a corner at this spot. However, the question remains: do you take a quarterback and hope and pray that he can just uplift one of the worst, if not the worst, rosters in football around him, or trade down, try and build, give Howell another year, and just try and build up a roster that really isn't there right now? There's honestly, there's no right answer. I think the Commanders are screwed either way. I don't think a quarterback is going to come in there and look good year one, certainly. With that being said, I do have them sticking and taking a quarterback, and that's going to be Drake May. I'm pretty confident that Drake May is going to be the second quarterback and second player off the board, really. He is a guy similar to CJ Stroud last year, where I do think last year Bryce was the clear QB1. This year Caleb is the clear QB1. And I do think Drake May in a lot of draft classes could have been the first overall pick, but he's just paired up with a guy that's slightly better than him. Drake May has better size than Caleb, certainly. 3 inches taller, 15 pounds heavier. He's younger than Caleb slightly. I think he actually is able to use his legs, arguably not maybe not the best, but one of, if not the best, running quarterbacks, because he's able to use his size and he's a big guy. I think, you know, he is going to be. I don't want to throw the Daniel Jones comparison, but it's strictly in terms of running the football. Daniel Jones is a little underrated in that department. I think Drake May will look a little similar to that in terms of just running the football, but as arm goes, he's a very talented thrower of the football, and he just has a lot of potential. And I think that's the biggest thing with Drake May. He is not a finished product, but that's why I think it's so dangerous going to a team like the Commanders, where fuck, he could get sacked 60 times year one, and who knows what that'll do to his confidence and his body. It's so dangerous if you're Drake May, but the Commanders, they just desperately need talent, especially at quarterback, and Drake May certainly is worthy of the number 2 overall pick. Next up, we got the Patriots. There's only two positions of need. They need more than just this, but there's only two spots they could go with this pick. Either trade down, take Marvin Harrison Jr., or take a quarterback. I don't love either option. Obviously, you got rid of Bill because they were just on a downward spiral for years now. And Mac Jones, the relationship is done. I think the bridge is burned. I honestly don't see a world where Mac Jones stays on this team and plays for them next year. I think they're gonna trade him in the offseason for a fourth or a fifth round pick. I think Mac could actually be successful elsewhere. I mean, we saw what he did as a rookie with little to no talent around him in terms of receivers. Um, but the Patriots right now, offensively, it's the worst offensive roster in football. Let's call it what it is. They have no receivers. They only have Ramondre Stevenson in the backfield, and he himself is not a top 7 or 8 running back in the league. They have a bad O line. They just don't have anything. So similar situation with the Commanders. Do I think a quarterback is going to come in there and fix all their problems? No. Even if he's a great young quarterback, it's too much to overcome in New England. With that being said, third overall pick, I do think, just because of the lack of other options you have around you, maybe a Justin Fields would be a really good option for the Patriots. However, uh, they don't strike me as the team that would go out and make a trade for an already established quarterback. I feel like they'd rather bring in a guy on their own terms and develop him. So because of that, I do think they're going to draft Jaden Daniels. And Jaden Daniels is a guy who preseason I didn't even consider him a first round guy. That's because what he showed us last season in 2022 wasn't worthy of being a first round guy. However, credit to Jaden Daniels, he took the biggest jump of any player in all of college football this year, going from a good young player to a Heisman and a dominant player. And, he glides when he runs the football. He effortlessly, long strides, gets down the field, takes too many unnecessary shots, but he puts his body in harm's way. But he is an electric runner. of the football. That's not all he is because he has stepped it up massively in terms of his accuracy downfield, his poise. He doesn't, people think a running quarterback, he just leaves the pocket at first, at a moment's notice, but he hangs in there and makes the difficult throws downfield. And I like that about Jaden Daniels. I think he has some dog in him. And if there's anybody that could go to New England with the lack of talent they have and just make shit happen, I think Jaden Daniels would be that guy. The problem again is that they got nothing. They got nothing. So how are you going to succeed with nothing around you? That's a difficult proposition for Jaden Daniels, but not too much optimism about that to be honest. But I do think he is worthy. He's played himself into a top 10 pick certainly, and I do think the Patriots are desperate enough to take a quarterback in the top three. Next up, we got the Cardinals. This is a no-brainer. I'm not even going to spend too much time on this. They're a bad roster, but you know they take the best player available, right? And who would that be? Well, pretty simple. Marvin Harrison Jr. Marv is a freak. It's like he was made in a lab, honestly. I don't think he's going to have the best individual athletic stat. He's not going to be the fastest 40 time. He might have the highest vertical, but I don't think he's going to have the highest vertical. I don't think he's going to have the fastest three cone time or anything like that. But it's the mixture. When you take everything into account, he's going to have a 40 some inch vertical. He's going to have a 4.4 40. Like it's just not to mention the fact he's 6'4". Like come on, man. He's special, obviously. The route running, obviously, he runs routes like he's 5'10", but he's 6'4". The mid air body control. He makes catches regularly that you wouldn't even consider a catchable ball for most people. Like you wouldn't even be mad if the guy didn't even get his hands on the ball in some of these situations. And Marv's getting his hands on the ball and bringing it down and controlling it and getting his feet in bounds always. Like it's just he is the best wide receiver prospect I've ever seen, and I think he could certainly be going even higher than this. To the Patriots at 3, or even the Commanders if they trade that pick. Somebody else trades up for Marv, but he is certainly worthy of a top 5 pick. And the Cardinals, honestly, they're getting a steal. I know it's tough to say a steal at number 4, but Marv might be the most talented player, regardless of position, in the whole draft. Next up, we got the Jets moving up. Now, normally the Chargers would be holding this pick at number 5, but I think the Jets would move up here to get their pick of offensive tackle, right? Because that's what they need desperately. You look at the teams in between the Chargers and the Jets, we know the Jets need tackle more than anything, and I think some of these other teams would certainly be willing to take a tackle as well. So I think the Jets here, they know what they need. They're in win now mode with Aaron Rodgers. They certainly would not mind possibly giving up an extra first round pick next year to move up 5 spots. But I think they do move up here and they take the tackle of their choice, in this case being Joe Alt. I think Joe Alt, it's been said for years now, maybe not years, but at least 2 years now, that he is the best offensive tackle prospect in the draft, the most fundamentally sound, the mix of height and size, his fundamentals, his technique. I'm not an O line expert by any means, but I listen to people a lot smarter than me, and they say that Joe Alt is going to be an NFL tackle for 10 years. That's what everybody's saying. And I think the Jets, you don't even need him to be the best at his position. I think a rookie Joe Alt is going to be the Jets' best offensive lineman, just in general. Right? It's set in stone. So I think when you have a quarterback as old and as fragile as Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career, you got to do whatever you can to protect him. Last season obviously was not even close. So this season, I think it's offensive line or bust if you're the Jets. Next up, we have the Giants. A lot of needs. Their offense is horrendous. You could make a case for anything on the offense, really. I think the two guys here I would really consider, maybe even three. You could say Brock Bowers in there too, but I would really consider Malik Neighbors to give them a true wide receiver one, and Olufashanu, because the offensive line for the Giants, Evan Neal is a bust. He's not an NFL tackle, and the Giants' offensive line was pitiful last season. You couldn't protect anybody, whether it was Tyrod Taylor, Danny DeVito, Daniel Jones. They couldn't protect any of them. So that has to change immediately if the Giants want to get back into the playoffs. So while I do think receiver is a big need, I think it would be easier to address receiver in the later rounds or in free agency than it would be to draft a guy like Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Similar to Joe Alt, I just think he's a very safe prospect. He could have been a top 12, 15 pick last year if he wanted to. He came back for some reason. Penn State didn't do a goddamn thing, so I think it was a mistake on his part, really. But he went back to college, decides to come out now, and I do think he's going to be a top 7 pick. I don't think he falls out of the top 7 at all. Fashanu, similar. I'm not going to break it down. I'm not an O line expert, like I said. He will be a top 10 pick without a shadow of a doubt. Giants need tackle. No brainer here. Next up, we got the Titans at 7. Tough break for them. The two tackles flying off the board right before them, but that also makes sense why the Jets would trade up, right? Because you know the Giants and the Titans, if available, those tackles aren't falling past these two teams. Now the Titans tackle probably not an option. Talisi Fuaga had a great Senior Bowl. He's a good prospect. I think he certainly could go top 10, but top 7, it depends on how desperate the Titans are. I don't really see it happening. So you look elsewhere. The only receiver they had on their roster that was worth a damn was DeAndre Hopkins, and he is probably gone. I don't see a world where he returns next season. So now you don't have anybody. You don't have any receivers. Traylon Burks, 2 years in, it's fair to call him a bust. He could obviously turn it around, but he has not been anything good so far. So you need a receiver just as bad as you need tackle, in my opinion. Will Levis, get him some type of a weapon. And if you want to talk about a weapon, look no further than Malik Neighbors. He was the best receiver in college football this season, I think. Odunze was great. Marv was great. Troy Franklin was great. I think Malik Neighbors consistently was the most dominant, the most explosive receiver in the country. He does his damage downfield, but in open space. The run after the catch for Malik Neighbors, he's elusive. He plays I don't know how to put it. He's so slick. You can't hit him when he gets the ball in his hands. He he's also an amazing just deep threat. I'm talking just taking the top off a defense, put him one on one, even one with a corner or a safety. You have to bracket him. You have to give extra attention. You can't leave Malik Neighbors one on one with anybody. He is going to run right past them. So Malik Neighbors to the Titans, I think it would just be exciting. I think he provides all the explosivity you need for NFL #1 receiver. I think he could play outside. He could also play inside. He is going to get the ball all over the field. He's not going to be boxed into one specific area. So I think the Titans, if you can't take tackle, Malik Neighbors is the pick for you. Falcons at 8. It's so tough. I think you're just too high for a quarterback here, honestly. If Jaden Daniels failed, that would be the dream scenario for the Falcons. Maybe even you trade up to number 5 with the Chargers if Jaden Daniels failed at 5. But at number 8, in this mock draft, I'm going to be more conservative. I'm going to be more conservative with the quarterbacks specifically. Even though I personally think Michael Penix and Bo Nix are both first round caliber players, they both have a lot of concerns really, and I'm not as confident that they're both going to be top 12, top 15 picks. So we're going to be a little bit more conservative with that. So if quarterback's off the table for the Falcons, what else would you look to? Well, I'd look to the defense. They hired defensive coordinator Raheem Morris. I feel like his first agenda would be to improve that defense, get some youth in there. They got a couple young players. They got AJ Terrell. You traded for Jeff Okuda, but they don't really have. Yeah, you drafted Arnold Ebiketie like 2 years ago, I think. So you don't have that much young talent up front. I feel like that would be his first objective coming in with his first draft. So with that being said, I think Dallas Turner is the pick for the Falcons. He is, I think, no, I know he is the best defensive prospect in the draft. What I mean by that, I think Dallas Turner has all the physical traits to be the best defensive player in this draft, certainly. He showed at Alabama as a true freshman, 8.5 sacks. Last season, not as impactful. I said he had to step it up this year, and he certainly did that. Career high 10 sacks, career high 14.5 tackles for a loss, 53 tackles. He has shown growth in college, and 6'4", 242. He is a pure edge rusher coming off and using his speed and his power. Really, he's not one dimensional in the fact that he only goes after the quarterback. He blows up plays in the run game. So I think his upside, I think you play day one immediately. but his upside for the future, I think, is what makes him the first defensive player off the board for me. He has Trayvon Walker level upside and potential as a just a dominant physical freak of an edge rusher. Now we got the Bears' second pick here. So you drafted quarterback with the first pick. Now, what do you do? I certainly think edge rusher is in play. They could even take the first cornerback off the board if you don't want to bring back a Jalen Johnson. But I do think if you don't take, you could even take Marv at the first pick. If you don't take a guy early on, a receiver that is, I do think that receiver certainly is in play here. DJ Moore, amazing, had a career year damn near. Maybe even did have a career year. He was amazing last season, all pro caliber. But besides him, you didn't have anybody. Darnell Mooney is missing in action, nowhere to be found. Velus Jones is a bum, respectfully. So you need somebody else in there. Who do you take? I think Romo Dunze certainly has proven that he is a top 12 player in the whole draft. He he his place. I still got to make the compilation. I'm going to make a compilation of Romo Dunze mossing cornerbacks one on one on the left side of the field. It's going to be 2 or 3 minutes long. It's ridiculous just how many times he wins one on one contested catch situation. Michael Penix did a great job putting the ball in his direction, but Odunze had a master class of outside route running, body control, and just athleticism. There's not a corner in the country that you can just line up opposite of Romo Dunze one on one and expect him to win most of the time. It's kind of shocking. He looks like an NFL Pro Bowler in a lot of these games in college, right? And he has the body for it already, 6'3", 215. But it's most college guys, right? The way they win is you scheme it up, right? You get the receiver open, you get him the ball with a head of steam, you get blockers in front of it, like you do these things. You don't usually see receivers running NFL type routes, and what I mean by that is just one on one, press coverage, go up and make this difficult catch. It's Washington's go-to play was a one-on-one jump ball with Romo Dunze. You don't see that really. Like it was so strange, but it was amazing to watch. But I think Romo Dunze has shown so much on tape in terms of he could go into the NFL right now and and start on the be a number one receiver and do the same thing he was doing in college. These NFL cornerbacks are not that physically different than a lot of the corners he was going up against. They're not going to be able to break up the passes either. So I think Romo Dunze is going to be a top 10 pick. And the Bears at 9, it just makes the most sense here. Next up, we got the Chargers, obviously, moving back with the Jets here. What do you do if you're the Chargers? Well, I certainly think tackle to protect Justin Herbert would be in play here. A guy like Fuaga, J.C. Latham, even Amarius Mims, all options there. Brock Bowers, I've loved the pick. And then cornerback, certainly. I mean, certainly could take the first cornerback off the board. Even at they got a lot of options. They got a lot of holes they could fill here. But what do I think? It's a no-brainer for me. Brock Bowers is a top 3 player just in general on the board. I think it's Marv, it's Brock Bowers, and it's Caleb, or the 3 guys who I think would have a 99 or 100 overall grade in this draft. And Brock Bowers falling to 10 is insanity, right? How does he fall that far? He's possibly nah. I think he's the best tight end in college football history. If you ask me, for my money's worth, he's the best ever. And he, what does he do well as a receiver? He changes the game like tight ends don't really do. Even the best tight ends, the only guy I could compare him to was a Travis Kelce, where he's the number one focus of a team's offense, and the defense knows it, but you can't stop it. There's nothing you can do. He makes spectacular game-breaking plays at the tight end position that you just don't see elsewhere. Even in the NFL, he's better than most NFL tight ends. I'll say that right now. Brock Bowers last season would have at 20 years old, Brock Bowers would have been a top 10 tight end in the league. Now he's probably a top 6 or 7 tight end in the league. Day one, immediately. He might be all pro next season. Honestly, I mean that honestly. He is that good. He's that talented. He's not a slouch in the run game. He throws blocks out there. He's physical. He's everything you want in a tight end. And with Justin Herbert, I think he'd be an All-Pro 5 times at least. That's just what I'm saying. It's not, it's not overhype. I don't think he's that talented. And if you pair him with a young quarterback who would play with for a long period of time, I just don't see bust potential. Part your besides injury really. Next up, we got the Vikings quarterback here. Like I said, I'm gonna be more conservative. I don't think quarterback's in play, and I do think Kirk is going to be back with the Vikings in the future. So let's assume that's the case, right? If that's not on the table, certainly it would be either edge rusher or corner, right? Those are the two top positions here in this range, the early tens. If you're looking at cornerback, you're probably talking a Nate Wiggins, a Kool-Aid McKinstry, a Terrion Arnold. If you're talking pass rusher, we're probably looking at a Liatu Latu, a Jared Verse, possibly a Chop Robinson. What do I think the Vikings would need more? I think the Vikings have missed on cornerback so many times. And I know they got Byron Murphy from the Cardinals. I know they drafted Andrew Booth basically in the first round like 2 years ago. He's struggled with injury. So I still don't think they have their guy. Even though Byron Murphy certainly, you think he's going to be there for a while, but I still think cornerback makes the most sense for me here. And I'm going to have the Vikings taking the first cornerback off the board, and that's Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. Nate Wiggins, by all accounts, is the safest pick at corner. From a body type standpoint, this is what you want at corner in the NFL. Right? You want a guy 6'1" plus, but can move fluidly, stay in phase with receivers, get his hand, long arms, Nate Wiggins, break up the passes. It's just he's fundamentally sound. He has the right body type. He's put in a resume, a body of work at Clemson that speaks for itself. He's physical in the run game too. I like the way Nate Wiggins plays. He kind of I like the corners that are kind of quiet. You don't hear much from, but when it's time to come up and lay a hit in the run game, they're willing to do that. Without hesitation. Nate Wiggins is one of those guys. I like him. I do think he's going to be the first corner off the board, and the Vikings at 11 is a prime spot. Really, I think the first spot. Besides the Chargers, 10 or 11, I think is the right spot for a corner here. Next up, we got the Broncos. Russ is gone. You don't have a quarterback. I would personally think that Sean Payton and the Broncos would like to address quarterback in free agency, or maybe even Justin Fields. Who knows? But quarterback, like I said, not really in play for me right now. A little too early. Wide receiver usually is what I give them. However, my top three receivers are already off the board, so I don't really know about that right now. Edge rushers certainly. I mean, they traded Bradley Chubb. They really haven't even been able to replace Von Miller since he left. They lost Vermont Jones to my Seahawks last free agency. So who are some guys? I couldn't even name you a guy on the Broncos defensive line. Honestly, I couldn't name a single one. Besides, Nick Benito they drafted last? Is that his name? But it's not enough. It's not enough. They need a number one edge rusher, and for me that'd be Liatu Latu. He His injury history, I think, is what's going to hinder him in the draft. Some people think he's not even going to go in the top 20, which is absurd to me. So we're talking fundamentally, technique wise, Liatu Latu is the best edge rusher, the best pass rusher in the country, in the draft, just in general. 23 and a half sacks the last 2 years and 34 tackles for a loss. You can't argue with that. He's shown you enough on film, his hand placement, his mix of speed and power, his physicality. He's a nasty guy. 6'5", 265. He is a defensive end, right? He's not really a linebacker. You're not going to see him out in coverage, but you don't need him to be because you want him on an island with a tackle every play, right? And he's a flawless prospect except for the injury history. But this is the thing, right? If it was last year or even a little bit this year, I'd understand that. But he's played 2 full years removed from that. So and he's been amazing. He's been a All American these 2 years. So I don't really think his I don't hold his injury history like some others may, right? And I understand that you're investing a lot in this pick, so you want to be as cautious as possible. However, Liatu Latu is a guy where you throw caution to the wind and you say, this guy's a stud. Let's get him on our team. Next up, we got the Raiders at 13. They could just say fuck it and take a quarterback. I certainly think the Raiders are a team to do that. However, bringing back Antonio Pierce, he saw a lot of strides made on that defense. I expect more of the same in terms of what you'd look to draft here. I do think defense is in play. They got a lot of growth last season from the D line. I think Tyree Wilson, when he was healthy and out there, I saw some flashes from him. I think Malcolm Kuntz is his name. I think he obviously turned it up in the second half of the season. Obviously, you know who Max Crosby is. So I think corner would be the real. I mean, who the hell do they have, besides like Nate Hobbs? Who are the options at corner for the Raiders, especially young guys? They don't have any. So corner, I think makes the most sense for me. That's going to be Kool-Aid McKinstry. He's kind of got tossed aside. I know Terry and Arnold had an amazing season last year at Bama, but I think Kool-Aid still, in terms of a boundary corner, has the perfect physicals you'd want. 6'1", 195. He's physical, right? And he's locked down. He's shut down. He's shown it now. Back to back years at Bama. He I just he's a quiet. You don't really hear much about him, so he's kind of just getting pushed to the back burner here. But I don't really agree with that. I still think Kool-Aid could even be the first corner off the board. I think a lot of teams are going to like him. They're going to watch his tape and they're going to say, "Oh shit, he didn't allow anything this game. He didn't make one mistake in coverage this game." So I just I still think Kool-Aid, even though a guy like Terry and Arnold, his teammate, is going to get a lot of attention, a lot of hype going into the draft, I still think Kool-Aid is the guy who's going to be a top 15, 20 pick, certainly. And a team like the Raiders that's needy for a cornerback, not be shocked at all if he goes in the top 12. Saints at 14 here. Honestly, I don't think quarterback is in play here. I think Derek Carr, considering how awful Pete Carmichael was as an OC, considering the injuries on the offensive line, considering not having Michael Thomas or Kamara for the first several games, it's like Derek Carr had to deal with a lot last season, right? And I still think he performed solid, right? Not great, obviously, but not awful. Then they got a lot of things they could do on that team to improve the offense overall. And look, I have heard that Ryan Ramczyk has a possible career ending. I don't know if it's a neck or a back injury, but his career might be done due to his injury. If that's the case, you need tackle and you need it now. So I think a guy like Amarius Mims, from a upside standpoint, in what he could develop into if you treat him right and you teach him what he needs to learn. I did say before that I would not include Amarius Mims in any more mock drafts. However, he opted out of Georgia's bowl game against FSU, which would lead me to believe that why else would you opt out if you're not going to the draft? So I do think he's going to go into the draft, and I think he's going to go in the top 20 picks. So Amarius Mims certainly, me personally, he is my number three offensive tackle behind Joe Alt and Olufashanu. So a lot of options you got. Me. I wouldn't be mad at Fuaga or J.C. Latham, but Amarius Mims, I think, has the best chance outside of those top two of being an all-pro caliber tackle in the NFL, left tackle specifically. Next up, we got the Colts at 15. Quarterback. Why the hell did I put quarterback here? They don't need quarterback. Cornerback, certainly. I think, yeah, I think cornerback's the pick. I've had Cooper DeJean to the Colts for so fucking long now. It's kind of ridiculous, but I think it makes sense. You think of what they did last year in terms of going all athletic animals, all genetic freaks last season, right? And then you look at them taking a white cornerback and you kind of laugh at that. And I understand. I'm not I'm not oblivious here to taking a white corner in the first round. However, the thing about Cooper DeJean and why a lot of people love him, a lot of people even have him as CB1 on their draft boards, is he gives you so much versatility. What I mean by that is he's going to be your kick and punt returner day one. He could play safety in the deep third of the field. He can play in the nickel. I think it's possibly his biggest strength is in the nickel, coming up and blowing up plays in the run game, blowing up screen passes, but he can also play outside. He gives you so much. And for a defensive coordinator to be able to put this one guy in so many different spots and be confident that he's going to succeed in all of them is an amazing skill. Don't underestimate that. And not only does that, he is a playmaker on defense. Okay, he makes big time game changing plays. He's not one of these guys that you're not going to hear from him in a game. For better or for worse, you're going to hear something that Cooper DeJean did in this game, right? So I think the Colts, next to Julius Brents, Cooper DeJean, you really got something going then. I think on the secondary in Indianapolis, I certainly think that'd be something that they'd be willing to explore. Next up, we got my Seahawks. A lot of needs, obviously. You can anything besides running back and receiver, you could sell me on for the Seahawks here at 16. Um, Me personally, what would I want here? Oh man, I mean, I probably want Michael Penix just because I'm biased. I like Michael Penix. I'd want to see him in Seattle. But what do we need most? I'd probably say front seven defensive line because we just haven't been able to stop the run for so long. This pick would have to be, I think, to change that. And we got Mike McDonald in. You saw what he did with Justin Matabuke. The thought of that, and then potentially him drafting the best interior defensive lineman in this draft, Johnny Newton, that would that that gets me going. That pause, but that really makes me think that interior defensive line is really on the table for the Seahawks here. Like I said, stuffing the run, but also getting after the quarterback. You don't really see a pure D tackle getting 13 sacks over a 2 year stretch. Like that. Don't overlook how impressive that is. He's a little undersized, but honestly, I mean, he's a guy who could play outside and inside. We had a lot of guys like that, Jerron Reed, Dramont Jones. Adding Johnny Newton in there and getting a defensive minded coach like Mike McDonald, it makes sense, but it also fills a lot of the holes we have on the D line. Having a guy that could come in and play three downs as a D line because he's good against the pass and the run. I think Johnny Newton is certainly a top 20 pick, and for my Seahawks here, I would love this pick. I would absolutely love it. Next, we got the Jaguars at 17 here. There's a lot of areas they could address. I mean, I think protecting Trevor Lawrence has to be pretty high up on that list. The secondary could certainly be addressed, and if you let Josh Allen walk, I don't know why you do that, but if you let some teams make horrible decisions all the time, if you let him walk, then you'd have to replace that obviously in terms of getting a pass rusher. However, I'm not going to go any of those directions. I think they're going to let Calvin Ridley walk in free agency, and I think they're going to opt for a cheaper solution, which I think would be Keon Coleman, keeping him in state. And Keon Coleman had such a weird season. The first month of the season, he was balling because they were getting him the ball, and people were talking about it. I saw Keon Coleman mocked as high as number 5 at one point, which is just crazy to me. I never really got too high or low on Keon Coleman. I feel like his skill set, everybody knows it. He's fast, he's an athletic freak. He goes up, he snatches balls out of the air. He's a nightmare to defend in the red zone. But, he's not a fundamentally sound route runner. You know, he's not a great blocker. And I think he needs time to develop. With that being said, I feel like all those things could be solved in the NFL, and I think the Jaguars certainly would like to explore getting Trevor Lawrence a deep threat. I think Christian Kirk is still an option for you, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, all these guys. You need a big body, physical outside receiver, and I think Keon Coleman solves that problem for you. You know, Calvin Ridley's kind of an undersized guy. Maybe not undersized, but you don't think of him as this big receiver. He's pretty skinny. Keon Coleman is kind of the opposite of that, right? He's a natural, big, just a monster of a man to throw the football up to. I think it makes sense for the Jaguars. Maybe not what most people would mock for them with their first round pick, but I think it would be exciting to see Trevor Lawrence, Keon Coleman, you know, deep ball connections in Jacksonville. Next up, we got the Bengals. Question here, the main one is, do you bring back a T. Higgins and a Tyler Boyd, or do you replace them in the draft, or do you focus on protecting Joe Burrow and improving the offensive line? It's an interesting dilemma. It's one they had several years ago with Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell. They elected to go with Jamar Chase. I think they're going to do the flip side of that now and go tackle over receiver. And I think J.C. Latham out of Alabama, you know, he has a lot of experience at this point playing right tackle, and I just think he could do that in the NFL day one. I think he's fundamentally sound. He has a very, very, very high pass blocking grade. Um, the only question would be, could he eventually transition to left tackle? I'm not sure. I think he was a right tackle in college. I think he's a right tackle in the NFL. But if you're the Bengals, you'd take that. You'd take any sort of upgrade you can have, right? Because I think what's his name? Is it Jonah? It's not fucking Jonah Hill, the actor. It's Jonah something. He's not good enough, right? Joe Burrow's gotten hurt enough already in Cincinnati. You need him healthy, obviously, if you want to have any hope of winning. And drafting offensive tackle should be their number one priority in Cincinnati. Next up, we got the Rams here. A surprisingly good season for them, but their defense is just not where it needs to be. Um, if you looked at the Rams roster, the average fan could only recognize about two names on their defense, just in general. They did a great job in last year's draft of addressing their front seven, getting Byron Young and Kobe Turner, both who were studs in their rookie year. Now I think it's time to go after and address that secondary. I'm gonna have Terry Arnold going at this pick. I talked about it earlier how he kind of had the breakout season this year at Bama, and he's getting more hype and more attention than Kool-Aid, deservedly so. He had an All-American caliber season this year at Alabama. 5 interceptions, 12 pass breakups. He is a physical guy, and I talked about like Nate Wiggins not afraid to get in there. Terry Arnold loves getting in there. He blows up screen passes and outside runs. He's a physical guy. I like watching Terry Arnold. I don't know if he's a nickel. I would like to see him play nickel, and I'm sure he will at times. But he is a boundary corner at heart. I think he has all the athletic traits you need. Not as big as a Kool-Aid or a Nate Wiggins, but still a similar size. I feel like or better physicality than both of them. And he's just a dog. He's kind of a pit bull out there. He's not afraid to talk, get after it. Make a big hit, take a penalty if you need to. So I do think he has done a lot for himself in terms of play in the regular season translating directly to the draft. Next up, we got the Steelers at 20 here. Quarterback, certainly. Quarterback, I think Kenny Pickett's a bust. I just don't see any talent there. Certainly, I think they should explore, if not replacing him in the draft, bringing in a guy like Russ or Kirk Cousins or something like that. But if you're not going to do that, then you'd obviously it has to be offensive line, right? Receiver possibly, cornerback I think is certainly in play here. However, I think you took Broderick Jones last year, kind of the start of really focusing on this offensive line. I would love to see them stick in the similar direction and really double down on trying to improve that run game. And for me, Talisi Fuaga is a great option. They hired Arthur Smith, I think, to be their new OC. He was the OC in the Derrick Henry, the real great Derrick Henry years in Tennessee. And I think drafting a run blocking freak like Talisi Fuaga would really signify the direction they're heading. They went ahead with Najee, Fuaga, Broderick Jones last year. That's really interesting, honestly. Like if they just fully embrace a physical, mauling run game with big body Najee Harris, also Jalen Warren in there, and drafting two physical run blocking tackles on either side. I really like that idea. It makes the most sense for me, being able to convince myself here on what would be best for them. It just, if the quarterback is not up to par, really lean in and embrace the run game. And Fuaga, out of any other option, helps you do that the most. Next up, we got the Dolphins at 21 here. It has to be tackle or tight end for me. DB, certainly, I think. You know, I think Xavier Howard, Jalen Ramsey, when they were healthy, they were solid, but they both have their own injury concerns, so that's on the table for me, especially safety as well on the other side of Javon Holland. But I think it's tackle here. I'm gonna have Troy Fatanu out of Washington. He played a great season in college football. He was one of the reasons Michael Penix looked so good. Their whole offense is, in general, really. The only thing with Fatanu would be, does he have the body of an NFL tackle? Not height, not arm length. He's just a little smaller than the average tackle. And I don't really get those concerns. They said that about Skoronski too. I know he didn't start at tackle last season, but I think he will transition to tackle. Same with Fatano. Even if he doesn't start at tackle day one, I see Fatano as an NFL right tackle easily, without question. He has the skills, he has the technique. Everybody is singing his praises right now. So I think Fatano will go in the first round and will be NFL tackle, starting tackle within 2 years. Next up, we got the Eagles. Tackle, certainly in play for the Eagles. Also linebacker, the what who they got? Rashawn Evans, was it what? No, it wasn't Rashawn Evans. It was Cunningham. They brought in Cunningham. That didn't really work. So linebacker certainly in play, I feel like. But I think corner, we kind of all saw on display. James Bradbury 1 year fall off was legendary. It was unexpected, and he was bad this year. And Darius Slay is getting up there. I thought guys like Ringo looked good in stretches. Certainly Eli Ricks as well. Josh Jobe, no, not at all. He's not good. So I think they need help at corner. And if that's the case, why not dive back into the Georgia pot? We know they love Georgia players, so why not continue to embrace that? Kamari Lassiter, look, he's not a guy who I would typically say would be a first round guy. I don't have a first round grade on him. However, I think with how many teams need cornerback, I think a guy like Lassiter would get pushed up the board, certainly. He's not a bad prospect whatsoever. The only thing about Lassiter is I don't really see him, I don't see the upside as a boundary corner. I see Lassiter as a really good CB2 at his best, which is there's no problem with that, especially since they have a Darius Slay out there. But I think Lassiter, he's not as big as you'd like. It's just, he's a really good player, okay? And as a first round pick at the 21st or 22nd pick, do you really want that if you're the Eagles? It's tough. I think Marlon Lassiter, he needs time. Thankfully, I think that's what you could have. Just have a good young rotation of guys, Eli Ricks, Keely Ringo, Kamari Lassiter in there. And you need help at corner, right? Because Bradbury's not cutting it. Josh Job's not cutting it. Anthony Maddox is not cutting it. Get Lassiter in there, and hopefully in 2 or 3 years, their cornerback situation looks a lot better than it is now. Next up, we got the Texans. Cornerback certainly in play for them. Also receiver, but edge rusher as well. They got a lot of options here because obviously they made the playoffs a year early, right? Nobody was expecting them to be as good as they were. And because of that, they're still behind defensively in a lot of areas. So I think you take a Quinyon Mitchell here, you pair him on the opposite side of Derek Stingley, and you just watch the fireworks because they're both playmakers, right? Derek Stingley had a lot of interceptions this year. Quinyon Mitchell, he's a boomer bust type of guy, honestly. I think he had a great Senior Bowl, by the way. Go watch some of that tape. He played very well in those practices. So I think he helped his draft stock. I'm almost certain now Quinyon Mitchell will be a top 20 to 25 pick. And look, he gives up a lot of big plays, but he's physical. He will jam you. He will get up close to you. And with his size, he's a little bigger than you would think. He looks skinny on here, but 6 foot, 200 pounds, damn near. Like that's a big guy. That's a physical guy, and you see it when he plays. He plays with a nasty edge to him, and I like that. Going to a small school like Toledo, that's kind of what you have to do, right? 37 pass breakups into. Think about that, guys. There are guys, a lot of guys that play 4 or 5 year careers. Good guys, starting corners that don't have 37 fucking pass breakups. He got that in 2 years. So he's a playmaker. He gets burnt from time to time. He gives up a big play every now and then, but he makes a big play every now and then. So I think Quinyon Mitchell is going to be a first round pick without a shadow of a doubt. Texans need corner. Makes sense for me. Next, we get the Cowboys here. I think it's receiver. Look, you could sell me on a lot of other things. Leighton Vander Esch's career possibly over. You could sell me on linebacker. You could sell me on tackle, replacing Tyron Smith, safety, interior offense. There's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things a lot of directions they could go. However, I think not having another receiver you could go to in a time of need besides CeeDee Lamb really hurts you. And we saw it in the playoffs. So I think that's something they need to explore. I think a Brian Thomas would be great for the Cowboys. I mean, if you're looking for an explosive play, there might not be a bigger explosive play receiver than Brian Thomas in this draft. Look at the stats right there. It's really similar to Jalen Hyatt from last season, except it was better. 17 touchdowns this season, led the country, and you see 6'4" there. He moves so well. He moves so fluidly for 6'4", and his ability to get downfield is, he's always open downfield. He's always taking the top off the defense. He's always making the difficult catches, adjusting his body, keeping his feet in balance, dragging the toes. He is a great red zone threat. He he's a great, just, you want to have him out there because at any given moment, he can make a play. He can take the top off the defense. The only concern I'd have, and the reason he's not higher than 24, is it's kind of like a Jalen Hyatt situation where he didn't really show a lot early in his career, but then he just broke out massively. So you could say a little bit of, not enough tape, not as good of a resume as some of the other receivers. That'd be the only thing holding him back here. But the size, the age, the potential, what he showed you this season already, it's it's all there for Brian Thomas. I would not mind whatsoever him going to the Cowboys at 24. Next up, we got the Broncos trading back in to the first round. Look, Packers here, I think they're really good. Look, obviously they have some areas they could address, but I don't really think they need. I don't yeah, like they could take a lot of players here that would help them. But I think the Broncos giving up possibly an extra first round pick, certainly a second round pick to the Packers, I feel like that would be more interesting for them than any player they could have taken with this pick right here. That being said, the Broncos trading back into the first round, who do they take? I got them taking Michael Penix. Penix and Bo Nix, both guys who I think can come in and start day one with ease, make any throw you ask of them. And I think Sean Payton would love a guy like Michael Penix. And for the concerns for him, it's really just two things. It's his injury history at Indiana and his age, really. His skill set wise, he's good enough. There's no concern. The only concern would be his ability to handle pressure in the NFL because his offensive line has been so good that he doesn't really have to deal with that too often. And I understand that, but I still think he's able to get the ball out quickly and make the right read when the time comes. When it comes to his injury history, similar to Leatu Latu, look, I've seen two straight healthy, good seasons for Michael Penix. So his injury history, if that's in the past, in my opinion, I wouldn't concern myself with that. In terms of his age, that just makes it more. It makes it make more sense for a team like the Broncos, who's looking for a guy to come in and start right away. Would you want a 20-year-old if you're the Broncos who doesn't have as much experience? Michael Penix has years and years of being a leader and, handling that responsibility and learning different types of offenses and playbooks. It makes more sense for a guy like Penix to go to a team and start day one. And I think the Broncos would be a great option for him. And it just makes more sense. I think he certainly is talented enough to go in the top 20. Same with Bo Nix. But I just think from moving forward now, I'm going to assume teams are going to be a little bit more cautious with these guys. Next up, we got the Buccaneers here. Offensively, they were a surprise team. We didn't expect Baker to come in and be as good as he was. We didn't expect Mike Evans to have a damn near a career year. Rashad White was amazing. So they were offensively, they were surprisingly good. Defensively, I don't think they were ready to be a playoff team yet. There are a lot of holes there, especially in their passing defense. It's not good enough, right? It's not good enough right now. What do you do to solve that? I think Jared Verse, keeping him in state, he is he is a possibly the best mix day one of a pass rusher and a run defender. Um, he's big, 6'4", 260. I think he could play interior, honestly, because he's a physical guy. He uses his hands well. He's a power rusher. He moves guys easily in the run game. So I think he is a traditional down defensive end, but I think I mean, I don't know what it is. Every single time I do a mock draft, I have Jared Verse falling farther than he probably should. I don't know why, because I like him as a prospect. It's just every time I just don't have him going in the top 20 ever, which he could go in the top 12. He's that good. He's that talented. He could have been a top 20 pick last season. He decided to come back for an extra year. So Jared Verse is incredibly talented, and he deserves to go even higher than this. But it would be a steal for the Bucks to get him at 26. Next up, we got the Cardinals with their second pick here. Obviously, you take receiver with your first pick. They have a lot of holes in this defense. Their secondary sucks. I'll be honest. They got the worst cornerback room in the whole league. So you need to address that. I don't know how you do it at number 27 here. Most of the good guys are already off the board. So we're going to have them going in a different direction. They got, remember, DC Jonathan Gannon. Remember what he did in Philly. Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, Javon Hargrave. Like, the interior of that defensive line was always stout. And now that he's in Arizona, I feel like that's something he would try and replicate. So Byron Murphy out of Texas, Josh Sweat, that's not Josh Sweat, is it Devondre Sweat is the defensive tackle from Texas, getting all the attention right now. But I feel like he's kind of he's more of a just a big body run stuffer, whereas Byron Murphy, I feel like is actually the better prospect because he's not 308,000 pounds. He's 308 pounds. He's not six. He's 6'1". I don't know what the hell I do with those numbers right there. But Byron Murphy, as a pass rusher, has a lot more upside. I feel like getting after the quarterback from the interior is so difficult because you always got multiple people on you. But I think Byron Murphy has the upside. Only 21 years old. Like, obviously the Cardinals are in the middle of a rebuild, right? They're not looking for day one superstars, right? But I think Byron Murphy in the future could potentially be a game-changing interior defensive pass rusher. And those guys, if you find them, it's rare if you find them. But if you find them, it can change your entire defense. So I feel like Jonathan Gannon would be willing to take that risk and take a shot on a guy like Byron Murphy. Next, we got the Bills here. Defensively, corner and edge rusher, the two biggest needs. Offensively, it's getting a replacement for Stephon Diggs, getting a deep threat in there. And I think Troy Franklin would be exciting. He's a big guy, 6'3", and he gives you that deep threat ability, similar to Rome Odunze down that left sideline. He is exciting to watch because he makes a lot of big plays, a lot of explosive, exciting plays downfield. But he also has some shiftiness to him. Like, I feel like he could play a lot more inside than people give him credit for. People just think about him as this boundary deep threat guy, only known for his deep balls. But like I said, I think the Bills would be able to use him in a lot of creative ways. And look, I just think the relationship with Stephon Diggs is kind of, on thin ice, to put it lightly. I don't think he plays many more games with the Bills. They got to start looking in other directions. And Troy Franklin would be an amazing replacement and just great value for them. Pair Troy Franklin with Josh Allen, that's a scary sight. Next up, we got the Lions. I'll be brief here. It has to be corner. We saw in the playoffs Kindle Vildor. I didn't know who Kindle Vildor was before the playoffs, but I found out during the playoffs because he sucks. I mean, every big play the Lions gave up, if it wasn't on Cam Sutton, who was a fail of a draft or a free agency signing, it was on Kindle Vildor. Rookie Brian Branch, who was a nickel safety, ended up being their best cornerback, which is unacceptable. They need corner desperately, but a lot of guys are off the board, so we're going to have the first time I've talked about this guy, Ennis Rakestraw, out of Missouri. Look, I'll be honest, same with Kamar Lassiter. Not a guy who I would typically consider being a first round pick. However, I think with how many teams desperately need corner this year, he is a guy who could be pushed up. And look, the things I like about Rakestraw, he has a very high coverage grade. He does not foul a lot, right? And you look at 0 interceptions, only 4 pass breakups, right? It's similar to Kool-Aid McKinstry where teams are just not throwing his way. I watched a lot of Missouri games and the opposing team's best receiver usually did not have a really good game because they were getting guarded by Ennis Rakestraw. So I think he is a guy. I think a lot more corners are going to go off the board, and I think Rakestraw certainly would be the last guy that I would consider as okay. He is really I'd really consider him going in the first round. The Lions being as desperate as they are, certainly I think would consider taking a corner. Ravens at number 30 here. Corner certainly in play for them, but obviously too many are off the board. I don't see that being realistic. Tackle possibly. Getting a real running back in there because of all the injuries they've had. But I do think wide receiver is the best bet for them. And who would you take in that situation? Well, I think A.D. Mitchell would be life changing for Lamar. We know Zay Flowers is kind of short, shifty, explosive, and he made a lot of plays downfield for the Ravens this season. But I think A.D. Mitchell has a completely different body type and skill set, kind of being just a primary deep threat, being able to adjust his body to bring the ball in, and defenses have to account for A.D. Mitchell when he's in the game because, especially in the red zone, he's at his most dangerous. He catches touchdowns easily. You have to account for him. And I think the Ravens now kind of moving away from the run first, tight end heavy offense to actually getting some talented receivers in there, I think would help Lamar significantly. But it's also just the direction that they're looking to go. And A.D. Mitchell, similar to Brian Thomas, where he does not have as much experience as being he wasn't even one. Neither of them were wide receiver ones on their respective teams. But I don't think he'd be a wide receiver one on the Ravens even because Zay Flowers is still that guy. That stat line you see at the bottom right there, I feel like he could do that in Baltimore year one, which may sound a little crazy, 11 touchdowns, but that's the skill set he brings in there. It translates to the NFL. You can't there's nothing that he does in college right now that he couldn't do in the NFL, and I say that confidently. So I like A.D. Mitchell as a prospect. I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL. Next up, we got the Niners here. It has to be tackle, right? Protecting Brock Purdy, finding the eventual Trent Williams replacement. It has to be their number one priority. Who is that going to be? I think Jordan Morgan is the best option. All the other guys who I would normally consider, right? J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims, Fuaga, they're all off the board. Even Troy Fatanu, could be a guy like Graham Barton, right? He could certainly be an option here. I think Jordan Morgan, in terms of starting out as a guard possibly, and then making that transition to tackle. I've heard a lot of people speak highly on Jordan Morgan, and especially at this pick. I mean, he's probably been mocked to the Niners more than any other player, right? So that's just that's just the wide consensus, I guess, on what people think the Niners are going to do with this pick. Next up, we got the Chiefs here. I am not going to pick anything besides receiver for the Chiefs at all. It just what could you possibly convince me that they need more than wide receiver? I don't know. And Xavier Worthy would be scary alongside a Rasheed Rice, alongside a Kelsey, Isaiah Pacheco, and he provides everything. He's explosive in the short field. You can get him the ball on end arounds and on screens. We know Andy Reid's so creative in the ways he gets his playmakers the ball, but he also provides, unlike any other receiver on the team, the ability to get separation downfield, create space, and take it all the way to the house when he gets those shots downfield. He is explosive. He's exciting. He's an athletic freak. He might have the fastest 40 time out of anybody. And this really might be their first chance to get the real Tyreek Hill replacement, not in terms of production, but in terms of role, certainly. Xavier Worthy is He's dynamic and an athletic freak, and I think the Chiefs would love that. I finally think they're going to draft that replacement receiver in the first round. This is an absurdly long fucking video. I hate this computer because I have to do this shit on PowerPoint rather than just recording the fucking shit on Zoom like I usually do. It took like 20 more minutes than it usually would. I mean, it's an hour-long video. It's gonna take 2 hours to render the shit. But if you're still watching, thank you. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Comment if you think I was way off base with your team's pick. Man, I'll see you on the next one though. Peace.